shows the title Infinity and Limits, Infinity, Eternity and Artistic Imagination. My first chapter is entitled Between Minuteness and Immensity. In the beginning of Charles Eames' legendary film, The Powers of Ten, of 1977, a couple is having a picnic on a patch of grass. After the meal, the man lays down for a nap, while the woman props herself up against his legs and begins to read. Then the camera moves directly above the picnickers and records a square 1 meter by 1 meter from exactly 1 meter away. The camera begins to pull away so that every 10 seconds we are 10 times further away from the scene that we saw 10 seconds ago. 2 minutes and 20 seconds from the start, we are 10 to 14th power meters away and view an image of the entire solar system. The camera stops at 10 to 24th power meters, or 100 million light years from the picnic, and shows a square over 100 million light years in size. Then the camera zooms back 10 times closer every 2 seconds and reaches the skin of the sleeping man and continues further into his body. First into a white blood cell, then the chromosome in the cell, its DNA, the molecular structure of the DNA into atoms, and then past the electric shells into the nucleus of the atom. In 8 minutes, the camera has zoomed from the human scale to the end of the universe, and then back into the smallest particles in the human body at the opposite end of the scale. This is an astonishing journey between immensity and minuteness, the opposite boundaries of infinitude, which are both beyond natural human perception and nearly beyond understanding also. As Eames' film reveals, we exist roughly in the middle scale of space. Similarly, we also occupy the middle scale of time between the subatomic instant and the staggering age of the universe, estimated at nearly 14 billion years since the Big Bang. The universe has kept expanding ever since, and our cosmic horizon is presently about 42 billion light years away. We can speak of scales in space and dimensions, but we can also speak of different time scales, such as cosmic time, geological time, evolutionary time, biological time, cultural time, human experiential time, atomic time, and subatomic time. With our natural senses, we are able to experience units of time that are close to the pace of our biological reality, such as the cycles of seasons, months, days, hours, and the beating of our own heart. We could also speak of poetic time in the arts, and as we heard yesterday, Paul Valéry, the poet, writes about poetic infinity, and that's the main topic of my subject matter of my talk today. All arts mold, articulate, and relativize time. In a delightful little book reflecting upon the multiple phases of time entitled Einstein's Dreams, the physics professor and writer Alan Lightman fancies 24 different realities of time. Poetic time, I must add, circular time, time that flows in irregular rivulets and eddies like a stream. Reverse time, time as a quantity instead of, time as a quality instead of quantity, and time that takes the form of a nightingale. Just to mention a few of the writer's poetic variations of time. But all art forms manipulate time, slow down, speed up, halt, and reverse time. An interesting cultural change in human consciousness during the past 2 centuries is the shift from an emphasis on time to the preference of space, regardless of the dizzying acceleration of experiential time. This is evidenced in history and literature. The 2 dimensions have also merged into the common spatialization of time and temporalization of space. It is evident that we live away from the extremes in the medium scale of the boundless continua of space and time. We are suspended between atomic minuteness and cosmic immensity, between a subatomic eye blink and eternity. The human consciousness hovers between the desire for an earthly home and the cosmic threat of the fall of Icarus, and between the comforting womb of experiential time and the terror of its inconceivable endlessness. By the way, it takes a while to see Icarus in this Bruegel painting, but it's a delightful depiction of this human trauma. Poetry, arts, and architecture mediate, articulate, and express the emotions of being suspended between these polarities. This imaginative depth is expressed in the ecstatically endless depths of the Baroque spaces of Giambattista Tiepolo, Polo's paintings, and Lorenzo Bernini's architecture, as well as the radiantly yellow carpets and pyramids of, I seem to miss an image. Yes, the yellow carpets and pyramids of hazelnut pine pollen by the artist Wolfgang Leib, where these works of art potentially grow into immense forests. Our temporal experiences of art extend from the momentariness of a note of Mozart or Arvo Pärt to the cosmic age of light in James Turrell's Roden Crater Project, in which a light which has traveled from a distant planet through the universe during thousands of light years before it hits our retina. Infinity can also be experienced in the bottomless universe of color in Yves Klein's blue paintings, and the apparent arbitrary and shapeless drip spaces by Jackson Pollock, which demonstrate the endless growth potential of self-similarity in fractals. The fractal structure has been found to be so constitutive to Pollock's paintings that it is used as a way of authenticating Pollock paintings. Only paintings that have fractal structure are Pollock paintings, which is a really remarkable discovery. The existential melancholy of Albrecht Dürer's graphic masterpiece Melancholia, the silent dreaming of architecture in Michelangelo's Laurentian Library in Florence, and Mark Rothko's canvases leading into deep spaces of darkness evoke an eternity of sadness. They bring us next to the infinity of human existential melancholy, the very boundary of human existence. An artist is worth 1,000 centuries, Paul Valéry argues. And indeed, the 50,000 years old rock paintings in Africa and Australia have already reached the halftime mark of the poet's surprising prediction. And even more astonishingly, these works of art conceal their staggering age and project the same vividness and nowness that we can feel in the works of the masters of our own time, such as Pablo Picasso and Cy Twombly. While mathematics and physics are engaged in the operational concept and reality of infinity, art stretches towards endlessness through memory, emotion, and sensory experience. The poet and the painter actually touch infinity. The mathematical symbol of infinity is an abstract and arbitrary symbol of the concept, which curiously resembles another mysterious figure, that of the Möbius strip, which was pointed out already yesterday. Möbius strip is a real spatial and haptic object, as demonstrated here by paintings by the Finnish painter Johanna Blomstedt, the grandson of the composer Jean Sibelius, and the Swiss minimalist Max Bill. The two loops of the mathematical symbol of infinity, one on the two opposite sides of the central node, unintentionally depict the two infinities of space and time above and below the scale of human existence, is perception and cerebral grasp, one terminating in infinitude, the other in nothingness. These painterly and sculptural depictions of the Möbius strip exemplify the theme of infinity or eternity in art, as well as the endlessness of the voids of Anish Kapoor's sculptures, which suggest black holes and the pool of infinite energy, gravity. Whereas the pyramids of Poland by Wolfgang Leib suggest infinity through endless growth. Kapoor's voids escape towards growing minuteness and non-existence. The Leib works take from 2 to 3 months time to collect the pollen. They are very laborious works, like the one on the left-hand side. Immensity and limits. In the same way that we exist in space and time, we are also suspended between freedom and limits, between choice and inevitability. In the arts, and especially architecture, limits are always more essential than freedom. Limits are real, freedom is a desire. We yearn for a dream of freedom and dream for a freedom, but can only think and act within limits. We also yearn for eternal youth and timelessness, but are frightened by the idea of endless life and petrification. Both endlessness of time and the end of time imply perishability and death. As Leonardo informs us, strength is born of limits and it dies in freedom. Yes, in the existential reality of making art, limits are more real than infinity. In the utilitarian and concrete world of architecture, materiality, gravity, and presence are more important than the utopian idea of unlimited freedom. In fact, architecture architecture can only create experiences of infinity by creating meaningful limits. Architecture could even be named as the art form of creating meaningful and poetic limits for human existence, both physical and mental. For mathematics and physics, infinity is a concept and an abstraction, whereas art is bound to relate its suggestions, such as infinitude and eternal, with human limits and mortality. Art operates in our embodied and sensory reality, and art makes us embody its suggestions as our experiential reality makes us believe, for instance, that the cylindrical container of Piero Manzoni's artwork entitled Infinite Line really contains an infinite line, as we also sense in our own body the unbearable pain of Marsyas, the satyr, when his skin is being peeled off as a cruel revenge of Apollo in Tizian's painting, The Flame of Marsyas. This is one of the paintings I can hardly tolerate watching, because the imaginative identification is so powerful. For mathematics and physics, art addresses by my embodied memory, imagination, and reactions, and it communicates both through conventional symbols and unconscious archetypal meanings. The archetypal meaning of circle, for instance, is the heaven, universe, and wholeness, while geometry, symmetry, and perspective evoke order, authority, and connection with higher forces. In the arts, the notions of infinity and eternity are concealed in utopia and desire, the sublime, ineffable, and the spiritual. Besides, imagination and intuition expand the realm of the sensory beyond the limits of the material world. Infinity and eternity take place in the realms of imagination. Art possesses yet another magical device to conquer and hold time: beauty. Beauty projects a realm of timeless reality. Joseph Brodsky even assigns beauty a grand evolutionary task. The top purpose of evolution, believe it or not, is beauty. I think the Nobel laureate poet is, Heinrich Reichling. Infinity in the arts is a mental motive, desire and experience, a yearning for something unknown and beyond reach. The sublime experience evokes infinity as a physical, spatial, or temporal dimension. The sublime surpasses the lived reality, scale and atmosphere, as well as the experiential or emotive potential of lived reality, and suggests realms of the unreal and the surreal. The sublime experience suggests scalelessness, boundlessness, and awe, a reality that is beyond human reach and comprehension. Often the sublime also suggests an otherworldly, mythical, spiritual, and ineffable reality, something that is divine or godlike and beyond human reach and understanding. Human reality is something that can be experienced through the senses, grasped by intuition, or projected by imagination and dream. Intuition expands the realm of the sensory into the imaginary. Memory, experience, and imagination, as well as actuality and dream, constitute a continuum, the human mental world. The sublime paintings of the 19th century American landscape painters such as Albert Bierstadt, the sublime paintings of Caspar Friedrich and Schirmer evoke a world that extends beyond the measures and qualities of the lived physical reality. A similar infinite, enigmatic, and often frightening dimension of infinity is also suggested by the sheer physical size of the abstract expressionist paintings, from the immersive canvases of Barnett Newman to the paintings of an existential boundary by Mark Rothko. These sublime paintings, landscapes or seascapes, storms, fogs, and illuminations exceed the characteristic of lived reality, whereas the abstract expressionist paintings themselves take a physical and bodily hold of the viewer. They address us through our embodied existence and sense of self rather than the retina. The American land artists such as Michael Heiser and Walter de Maria create sublime experiences through the sheer size of their works. Walter de Maria's lightning field gives rise to a sublime experience both through its enormous physical size and its connection with the powerful natural phenomena of thunder and lightning, a sublime and terrifying force of nature. James Turrell's light works give light a magical, almost tangible, almost tactile, tangible and material presence, whereas his sky spaces flatten the infinite depth of the sky into a picture. Also in architecture, daylight and illumination are the most subtle and emotive means of expression. From the 9-meter circular oculus of the Pantheon to the elevating churches of Le Corbusier, Alvarado, and Juha Leiviska, my Finnish colleague. Light is capable of projecting the emotions of reverence, worship, ecstasy, hope, and bliss all at the same time. Science and art. There was an unbroken tradition coming down from antiquity, according to which arithmetics, meaning the study of numbers, geometry, meaning the study of spatial relationships, astronomy, meaning the study of motions of celestial bodies, and music, meaning the study of motions apprehended by the ear, formed the quadrivium of the mathematical arts. By contrast to these, the liberal arts of painting, sculpture, and architecture were regarded as manual occupations. Whitcover informs us that in order to raise these manual arts from the level of the mechanical to that of the liberal arts, they had to be given a firm theoretical, which in Renaissance time meant mathematical foundation, and that was to be found in musical theory. Vittorio Gallese, one of the discoverers of the mirror murals 30 years ago at the University of Parma, which have opened exciting views into our unconscious interaction with the world, expresses an unexpected view of the relationship between science and art. This is what Gallese writes, quote, "From a certain point of view, art is more powerful than science. With much less expensive tools and with greater power of synthesis, artistic intuitions show us who we are, probably in a more exhaustive way with respect to the objectifying approach of the natural sciences." being human squares with the ability to ask ourselves who we are. Since the beginning of mankind, artistic creativity has expressed such ability in its purest and highest form, Gallese writes. Certain artists, especially of the conceptual orientation, have produced purely cerebral artworks that rely more on thought processes and intellect than sensory perceptions and emotive identifications, approaching thus the realm of science. The work of the Icelandic-Danish artist Olafur Eliasson is suspended between the realms of science and art. Usually his works have a meticulously considered scientific ground based on a theoretical knowledge of physics and perceptual psychology. This background gives rise to his perfectly executed technical constructions, which lead the viewer to personal sensory observations from the realm of objectivity into that of subjectivity. Frequently, these observations have the character of a miracle or otherworldliness. The viewer's experiences are evident and clear at the same time that they are enigmatic and unbelievable. The dual character of the works as unmasked scientific experiments and emotive confrontations usually creates the feeling of a phenomenon that is beyond the boundaries of normality. Altogether, there are three categories of giving human meaning to our being in the world: religion or myth, science, and art. The first is based on belief, the second on rationality and knowledge, and the third on emotion and experience. Eliasson's works usually fuse or short-circuit the Eliasson's works usually fuse or short-circuit the categories of science and art and give rise to a sublime experience which can even evoke religious forebodings. While many of his works project sublime experiences, they can also reverse or conflict the viewer's expectations. In a concrete perceptual sense, his mirror works create infinitely repeating spaces or endless perspectival corridors. In his installation at the Louisiana Museum in Copenhagen, the interior of the museum was turned into the landscape of rocks, gravel, and water, reversing time as if the landscape that existed there before the construction of the museum had returned. His works in the Bregenz Museum on the right, designed by Peter Zumthor, turned the minimalist museum interiors into landscapes of water, water plants, and fog. The architectural space turns into a jungle. Nothing is more abstract than reality, Giorgio Morandi states. The object of art is not to reproduce reality, but to create a reality of the same intensity. Often the experience of a paradox, absurdity, or metamorphosis gives rise to an atmosphere of unreality and the ineffable, as in the works of Yanis Kounellis and Rebecca Horn. The surreal experience short-circuits the reading of causality, materiality, and time, suggesting an altered reality that possesses physical and mental characteristics beyond normality. A similar condition of being at the edge, in this case the edge of perception, is suggested by the nearly black paintings of Ad Reinhardt. These spaces first appear to be enigmatically and disquietingly empty spaces without any light or evoking black light that first appears formless but then turns into a construction, an architectural space. The elimination or confusion of stimuli and gestalt gives rise to autonomous imagery, as in the case of the all-white paintings of Robert Ryman. Leonardo advised artists to stare at a crumbling, eroding wall in order to acquire inspiration. Certainty and precision do not stimulate imagination, as they rather close it. Imagination calls for vagueness and sustained uncertainty. Henri Poincaré spoke of the significance of clouding one's thinking. And I come to my last chapter, Infinite in Architecture. The basic task of architecture is to define an enclosed space for purposes of human use, from dwelling to spaces for various other purposes: celebration, commemoration, and worship. In addition to these specific tasks, architecture is also a mediation between intimacy and the immensity of the world, between microcosm and macrocosm. Architecture does not only provide us our pragmatic and existential foothold in the everyday reality, but also in the realities of belief, imagination, and dream. Here the imaginary dimensions of infinity and eternity turn into mental realities. In his highly influential book, The Poetics of Space, Gaston Bachelard has a chapter entitled House and Universe, in which he writes, "Our house is our corner of the world. As has often been said, it is our first universe, a real cosmos in every sense of the word." In another context, he writes, "Such a house invites mankind to heroism of cosmic proportions. It is an instrument with which to confront cosmos." It is inevitable that the simplest hut is a condensation of significant meanings, as it frames our location in this infinity of space and gives our existence specific meanings. The fundamental task of our houses is to give us our existential foothold in the world, or in the flesh of the world, to use Maurice Merleau-Ponty's wonderful notion. In addition to providing our existential foothold in space, architecture also inhabits us in the endless continuum of time. Architecture is not only about domesticating space, it is also a deep defense against the terror of time. The language of beauty is essentially the language of timeless reality. Carsten Harris, professor of philosophy and an architectural philosopher, states, "The great masterworks of art and architecture exist in a timeless reality. The noble silence of Piero della Francesca and Johannes Vermeer's paintings seems to have overcome the consuming and erosing force of time." Thank you.